Did you know Cincinnati's Music Hall is built on top of thousands of unmarked graves? Welcome to Cincinnati Legends, a series where I, an artist who just moved to Cincinnati, draw urban legends, legendary landmarks, and the places that make this city great. As always, everything I draw is for sale on my website. Today, I'm drawing Music Hall. You may know it as the Performance Hall, an historic landmark that it is today, but did you know that it used to be home to an orphan asylum and an estimated 6,000 to 10,000 unmarked graves? Beneath the ornate halls and awe-inspiring architecture lies a dark past, and today we'll dive into the secrets that are quite literally buried under Music Hall. From 1805 to 1855, the land where Washington Park and Music Hall now sit was home to the Episcopal and Presbyterian burying ground and Potter's Field. Friends of Music Hall describes Potter's Field as the final resting place for immigrants and paupers who had the misfortune of dying without identification or loved ones to claim their bodies. After a devastating outbreak of cholera that killed thousands, Cincinnati was in need of an orphanage. Over the space that is now the Music Hall stage, they built an orphan asylum, horribly referred to by neighbors as the pest house. For the next 20 years, the land around the asylum continued to be used as burial grounds for the homeless, orphans, victims of cholera, and an estimated 200 people who died in a steamboat explosion off the Cincinnati shore. By 1855, the city had purchased the land that housed both cemeteries and planned to shut them down due to public complaints and the belief that vapors from the dead bodies were causing cholera outbreaks. Even then, the space was considered haunted. A Cincinnati commercial article from August 1875 reads, "Nevertheless, we hear of some uncanny places, even in practical Cincinnati, where the dead render the lives of the living a burden to them. When the canal was cut through this soil, enriched with human remains and sown with human bones, about 100 skeletons had to be removed and committed to the already overcrowded place of nameless graves now covered by the buildings." Music Hall construction began in October 1876, and for the first time, the public witnessed the true extent of how many bodies were buried underneath. While we can assume some of the reports were sensationalized because in the Victorian era, people had a pretty morbid fascination with death and dying, newspapers told stories of boxes crammed full of skeletons and body snatchers stealing bones to sell. Today's archaeologists guessed that there was about 18 boxes of human remains moved from the construction site and did say that it's likely that a fair amount of bones were either removed or destroyed by onlookers, souvenir hunters, and medical students. Reports from 1876 said the bodies would be reburied at Spring Grove Cemetery, and you would assume that'd be the end of the story. However, every major renovation of Music Hall that's taken place over the last century has resulted in the discovery of more bodies, and all those souls who've never been given a final resting place have been said to linger. I'll leave you with another quote from 1875. "Not a foot of ground lies unoccupied by moldering bones, human bones, which the ringworms have long since tired of gnawing. It was, of course, natural enough that the ghost disinterred from the beds of the canal and the ghosts claiming kinship with the bones disinterred to make room for the elevator should cease to rest." Bodies have been found under Music Hall in 1876, 1927, 1988, and most recently, 2017. The 1927 renovation uncovered an underground pit containing 65 graves. Workmen at the time coined it the Valley of Death. In the same year, 3 coffins dating as far back as 1831 were found in the area where they planned to build a new elevator. Reports say that rather than moving the bodies to Spring Grove Cemetery, they were given, quote, a fitting burial in the pit of the new elevator shaft. Over 60 years later, in 1988, after the bodies dumped in the pit were long forgotten, workers broke ground on a new elevator shaft, uncovering over 200 pounds of bones. Most recently, just 9 years ago, 6 more grave shafts and the arms and legs of 4 skeletons were found by workers checking for asbestos. An archaeological group assumed, based on the incomplete skeletons, that these bodies were not originally buried there, but rather moved during the 1927 remodel. Given the scale of Music Hall and the lack of respect for the bodies buried beneath, both during their lives and their deaths, it seems unlikely that all the remains have been removed and reburied. Knowing that, it makes sense that there are so many reports of restless souls inhabiting Music Hall.
Attenzione a Burghiaia, tornagliela a Crouzado!
Reports of hauntings date all the way back to 1875, back when Music Hall was a vast wooden structure called the Exposition Building. Around the time of the Exposition Building's demolition and the construction of Music Hall, a night watchman shared his experience. The weirdest and strangest noises would occur at intervals all night. Rappings on the ceiling, under the floor, on the doors and windows, the sounds of stealthy footfalls behind me or of loud trampling before me, the crash of heavy timbers thrown from the ceiling, of glass dashed upon the floor, of heavy bodies being dragged over the planking. They never touched me, but I always knew when they were around, by an icy chill. I've gotten used to it. So used to it that sometimes when people have really knocked on the door, I didn't open because I thought it was only the dead they kept knocking, knocking, knocking. Friends of Music Hall gathered stories from former employees about their paranormal experiences while working there. One employee came down and brought his 3-year-old son Charlie with him. They went out on stage and Charlie was enjoying pretending like he was performing, and all of a sudden he looked over and said, "Daddy, who's the man in the box?" His father said, "There's nobody in the box, Charlie." Charlie said, "Yes, he is. He's waving at me right now." A box office worker was working at the window one night and heard the bell indicating someone was at the window, but there was nobody there. The buzzer kept going off, so he finally left the box office and went outside and didn't see anybody. He went back in, and it kept dinging, so he went back out again. At one point, he was back in the box office, and he felt a tug on his shirt sleeve. He looked down, and a little boy in period dress and a little cap was tugging on him. If you believe Music Hall is haunted, or if you've experienced anything paranormal at Music Hall, I would love to hear your story in the comments. And if you watched this whole thing, thank you so much for being here, and remember that fine art prints are available on my website.